think if we're speaking of politicians who are hit hard by the protests, by the economic crisis, and the popular anger that continues to rise here in Lebanon, Gibran Basir is probably at the forefront there. I mean, his talking to the Hezbollah leader is basically an attempt for him to get a few extra ministers in the next cabinet, and you know, that's kind of the sad thing about the situation we're in right now, is that we haven't had a government formed for the past 7 or 8 months under the Prime Minister designate Saad Hariri, precisely because of this, precisely because there are parties who want 1 or 2 more seats, and they kind of, you know, chalk this up to being a thing about Christian rights or a thing about Muslim rights.
But it just seems to me that if you're looking for help from the United States, you're looking for help from, you know, Western powers, it just seems to me that you're going in the wrong direction to ask the head of Hezbollah, because, of course, a U.S. designated terror organization. So if you're asking the United States for help and you're asking Europe to help you out of this crisis, it seems totally bizarre that you would do this just as some kind of political play to get a few more ministers on side. But I do want to ask you about your research in terms of this $250 million coming from the World Bank. I remember at the time there was a lot of controversy about the fact that it was coming into the country. People were very, very worried that if government officials from any part of the government got their hands on this cash, that it would not be put to the best use, if you will. How bad is this situation? I mean, how much of that money actually got to the people who need it? And was it a direct result of putting it through the banking system? Could there have been a smarter play here? Could they have done this better?
Yeah, I mean, so what we have here is actually UN aid. There was that famous $250 million package from the World Bank. That has not been dispersed yet. There was a big fight over how to disperse that, whether to do it in dollars or lira. But so the investigation that I published last week is basically about UN aid to the poorest of the poor in the country. This is for Syrian refugees, 9 out of 10 of whom live in extreme poverty. It was for poor Lebanese, half of the country is now under the poverty line, and also for Palestinian refugees in the country, 2/3 of whom are under the poverty line. And what we saw is that since 2019, and due to currency arbitrage, basically the banks were providing the UN with exchange rates that were, if you take the average of it, which we did, 40% below the real market value of the dollars they were giving them. And so banks were effectively paying out Lebanese liras and taking $40 on every $100 since 2019. Now, we were able to document $250 million of losses, but we think that the actual number is much higher. So it's very bad. I mean, $250 million is the entire value of this World Bank loan, which we are now trying to get out to the people. $250 million just lost to the banks.
So who's at fault on this one? I mean, because accountability is what you got to first admit that you have a problem in order to fix the problem, right? Isn't that what they say? So if we were looking to hold someone accountable on this one, is it the Lebanese banks? Is it the World Bank, who at this point, knowing what they know, which is probably even more than what most of us know or can surmise from all these reports, shouldn't they have known better than to do it this way?
Yeah, so after the Beirut explosion, which, you know, was a horrible, horrible thing that killed more than 200 people, destroyed much of the capital, there was this sense in the country that aid has to go directly to the people, because Lebanese politicians have just proven that they are, you know, they will mismanage things, they will pocket the money. And the international community had agreed. They said, yeah, we are going to give aid directly to the people. That hasn't happened, clearly. And what we see is that in the process, aid money gets lost. You know, part of it is the UN being at fault here. What analysts will say is, listen, they're the people with the money. You know, in the end, they have the power. Why didn't they enforce better conditions? Why didn't they push for a better rate? Why didn't they dollarize aid? And we are still seeing the battle being fought. You know, the World Bank pushed hard to get their aid to the Lebanese people dollarized. But in the end, this problem is not going to be solved by aid. You know, you can only do so much to give to those who are the most poor, and the most poor are rising every day. And so you're kind of looking at a situation where you're trying to plug holes while more holes are opening. And so what we really need reforms. And it's becoming clearer by the day that we will not get that from this political class or these politicians in power.